Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Horsemen of History in Zechariah chapter 1. As we come to the book of Zechariah, this is one of the post exilic prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And actually, Haggai and Zechariah are contemporaries. They are two prophets writing and prophesying at the same time. And the topic about which they are writing revolves around the rebuilding of the temple. Now, to back up, Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Medo Persian Empire, had displaced the Babylonians as an empire. And the first thing he had done is that he had given permission for all of the displaced peoples, including the Jewish people, to go back to their homelands and to rebuild their cities, and especially in this case, to rebuild the temple. And so some of the Jews had taken him up on that offer. Some had come back under Zerubbabel. We're going to see him later. He's sort of a leader, a descendant of King David, but he's not a king, he's a governor. And so they had returned to the land and working on the permission that they had been given, they began to rebuild the temple. But then the construction was halted in the days of the son of Cyrus. Cyrus had already died. Cambyses, his son, was now on the throne. And they ran into some local building issues. Didn't really have anything to do with Cambyses himself, but the construction was halted. They had offended the local governor, the local Persian governor, by saying, "We don't really want your false gods around our temple." And so the temple had been halted, the construction had been halted, and it stayed halted for quite a number of years. Um, and now we have these two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. They begin prophesying. Their prophecies are in the books that are named after them, and they urge the construction to begin again. They said, "Look, is it time for you to live in your paneled houses while God's house lies desolate? Go back and rebuild." And we're going to see the message both in Haggai and in Zechariah, and the people hear and the people obey. It's not long before the local governor is saying, "Wait a minute, they didn't have permission to rebuild." And he sends word to the emperor. It's no longer Cambyses, but by this time, by now it's Darius the Great. He's just become emperor of the empire. He's not the son of Cambyses. He's actually a distant cousin of Cyrus. And he orders an investigation to be made. And in this investigation, it comes out that Cyrus had given permission that was in their royal records, and Darius said, "Oh, my distant cousin Cyrus gave them permission. In that case, they can continue with the rebuilding process." And he's going to give permission. In fact, he's going to say, "And the work can be paid out of the royal funds. After all, it's your tax dollars at work." And so they're going to complete the temple. Now, that's the background of this prophecy. That hasn't all happened yet. Here's the date on this. We had 539 BC was when Babylon had fallen to Cyrus the Great. The Jews had been allowed to return to the land. In 516, spoiler alert, that's when the temple will be completed. And so we have Haggai and Zechariah prophesying around that time. Notice you've got Darius and some other things that are going to be taking place. For example, the book of Esther actually comes quite a bit later. And then Nehemiah, he's going to be not quite 70, 60, 70 years later. So he's got quite some time before he comes along. Now, it's been noted how similar Zechariah and the book of Revelation are. These are two, almost like a match set. Zechariah, we're going to see in this chapter, we're going to see four horsemen. And when we get to chapter 6, we'll see it described as four chariots with different colored horses. Remember, in the book of Revelation talks about the four horsemen, and each horse is of a different color. So that theme is going to first be introduced here in Zechariah. In Zechariah, we're going to see in chapter 2 a man with a measuring line measuring Jerusalem. When we get to Revelation chapter 11, a man with a rod measures the Temple Mount. And so the measuring takes place in both cases. In Zechariah, we see Satan in chapter 3 ready to accuse Joshua the high priest. That's not Joshua in the Battle of Jericho. That's a later man by the same name, Joshua, who is the current high priest. In the book of Revelation, we see Satan described as daily accusing the brethren, chapter 12 and verse 10. In Zechariah, we have the picture of the lampstand, that's a temple object, and 2 olive trees that are representing 2 anointed ones. Literally, it's going to call them sons of oil. In Revelation, it actually refers to the olive trees and the lampstand, and it says that these represent 2 witnesses, Revelation chapter 11, verses 3 through 12. In Zechariah, we're going to see a flying scroll signifying the curse that's going over the land. That'll be in chapter 5. In the book of Revelation, we're going to see seals of a scroll bringing forth judgments on the land. So these are going to be very much like each other. Now, the first section of Zechariah, and we'll have actually several sections, but the first section is going to be chapters 1 through chapter 6. And we're going to see 8 visions here. We're going to begin with what we're looking at in this class. It's going to be a vision of 4 horsemen. We haven't gotten there yet. And then when we get to chapter 6, we're going to see 4 chariots. The 4 horsemen will have different colored horses. The 4 chariots will be pulled by horses of different color. So there's a pattern and a symmetry here. Next, in Zechariah the remainder of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2, we see a sign of horns and smiths, that is, workers, and it's a symbol of judgment. And then a man with a measuring line who's measuring, and he gives a warning: flee Babylon. And so there's 2 sets of symbols and visions that indicate things about judgment and Babylon. When we get to chapter 5, we're going to see a flying scroll representing judgment. And we're going to be told that. And then a woman and a basket who will represent Shinar. Now, Shinar is just another name for Mesopotamia, or in this case, Babylon. So notice we've got the symmetry here. And then chapters 3 and 4 will be symmetrical too, because in chapter 3, we're going to see Joshua the high priest, and he will be representing the people of God. And in chapter 4, we'll see Zerubbabel, and he'll be standing next to a lampstand, and he will also represent the people of God. And so this entire section is a set of symmetrical musings, symmetrical visions that take us through what's taking place. And these visions are they're full of all sorts of symbolism. You know, the 4 horsemen aren't just about 4 guys on horseback. They are representing something, and that's the case with each of these. With that in mind, we're ready now to begin chapter 1, verse 1, in the 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius. Let me just note that we have certain things taking place both here and a few verses later. They'll both be in the 2nd year, although different months. And that's going to be chapters 1 through 6. When we get to chapter 7, we're going to jump forward several years. Chapter 7 will start off in the 4th year of Darius. That means that the entire book of Zechariah is not written at one sitting. It's written over a space of at least several years. So we have chapters 1 through 6. That's the 2nd year of Darius, different times in that 2nd year. And then chapter 7, we jump forward a few years to begin the 4th year of Darius. And I'm not saying it's, from chapter 7 through chapter 14 are all written in that 4th year, but at least it begins there, and then we'll continue. Notice the word of the Lord came to Zechariah the prophet, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo, saying, the Lord was very angry with your fathers. After all, that's how you had the Babylonian captivity, because of the anger of the Lord against their unrighteousness, against their disloyalty toward God. Verse 3, therefore say to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, and here's the command, return to me, declares the Lord of hosts, that I may return to you. You see, God had left them, but the reason God had left them is because first they had left God, spiritually speaking. They hadn't got up and walked out of Israel, but they had departed from them as far as their hearts and their loyalty was concerned. And so he likewise, in visions, had removed his presence from the temple. So notice, return to me, declares the Lord of hosts, that I may return to you, says the Lord of hosts. Do not be like your fathers, to whom the former prophets, those are the prophets before the Babylonian captivity, to whom the former prophets proclaimed, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, return now from your evil ways and from your evil deeds. But they did not listen or give heed to me, declares the Lord. That's why the Babylonian captivity had taken place, because they had not listened. And so, unless we want to go through that again, now the call is, it's time for you to return to me. Verse 7, on the 24th day of the 11th month, which is the month Shevat, in the second year of Darius. So we're still in the second year. Notice back in Zechariah chapter 1 through chapter 1 verses 1 through 6, that had been in the 8th month. Now we've already moved forward from the 8th month to the 11th month and the 24th day. And I'm assuming we're not going to see another time frame. So I'm going to assume that from this point on, we're going to be either on that day, or maybe over a period of several days, weeks, months, I suppose even years. But it could have all been the next night or the next several nights. So notice, on the 24th day of the 11th month, which is the month of Shevat, in the second year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah the prophet, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo, as follows. Now, I probably ought to mention here, since we looked at the 8th month and the 11th month, we ought to take the time frames described here and place them alongside of those that are found, because we find similar sorts of notations in the book of Haggai. So in the second year of Darius, first of all, in the 6th month, Haggai chapter 1, verses 1 through 15 are written at that time. And then Haggai chapter 2, verses 1 through 9 are in the 7th month. So you have, a month between chapter 1 and chapter 2. It's actually like reading two different sermons. Next, we read what we just saw in chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. That's the 8th month. And now we go back to Haggai, and in the 9th month, you have chapter 2, verses 10 through 23. You actually have 3 sermons in Haggai, and those are the 3. And now we're reading the 11th month. This is still in the second year of Darius, and that's going to take us through from the rest of chapter 1 in Zechariah all the way to the end of chapter 6. Then, as we already noted, when we get to Zechariah chapter 7, we'll jump forward to the 4th year of Darius. And this is all taking place while the temple is being rebuilt. Although by the time we get to the 4th year of Darius, depending on exactly how you count that, you count his ascension year. But by that time, that's marking the completion of the rebuilding of the temple by that time. All right, chapter 1 and verse 8. I saw at night. So this is going to be a night vision. Is this a dream? Is this a vision? I don't know. I wasn't there. But I saw at night, and behold, a man was riding on a red horse, and he was standing among the myrtle trees. Now, a myrtle tree, the Hebrew here is hadassim. Hadassah is actually is the name of the Jewish name of Esther. But Hadassim, notice is plural. The im is masculine plural. These are myrtle trees. A myrtle tree is sort of actually, the Hebrew doesn't say a tree; it just says the myrtle, and you're supposed to get it. It would be like saying a hibiscus or I don't know, I can't think of the names of any bushes. And you say, well, I thought it was a tree. No, actually, it's a big bush. Um, and so you're seeing a picture of one of these. And notice these bushes, I'm just going to go with myrtle trees right now. They were in a ravine. That is some sort of gully, some sort of depression area, not as big as a valley, but sort of maybe a wadi or a ravine. And notice there's a red horse, and there are red sorrel. Sorrel's like a reddish brown, and white horses behind him. So I have 4 horses, and the horses have different colors. Now we're going to see that as a motif, because we're going to see it here. We're going to see it in chapter 6, and we're going to see it again when we get to the book of Revelation, chapter 6. And so we have these horses, red, and then another red horse, and a sorrel, like I said, sort of a reddish brown. Most horses are sorrel. That's the most common color. And then white horses behind, a white horse is also behind him. So you start off with a red, sorrel, white, and I don't think the colors themselves are going to be all that significant. Just remember multicolored. When you get to the book of Revelation, actually the colors I think are actually used to picture different things that those horses are coming. In this case, that doesn't happen. We just see all the horses together. They're not going to be reporting separately. Instead, they're going to have a unified report. Verse 9, then I said, my Lord, what are these? He, Zechariah hadn't read the book of Revelation. It hadn't been written yet. And so he's at a loss as to what this is. And the angel who was speaking with me said to me, I'll show you what these are. Verse 10, and the man who was standing among the myrtle trees. Remember, a myrtle tree is sort of this big old fluffy bush. And if the horses are there, they're a little bit hard to see if they're actually in among the myrtle trees. That means they might actually be hidden. And their meaning was hidden to Zechariah. He has to ask, what are these about? And so the man who was standing among the myrtle trees answered and said, these are those whom the Lord has sent to patrol the earth. Now think about it. These are scouts. So think of them as light cavalry. And remember, an army needs to know where it's going. They need to have intelligence. They need to have information brought back. And the way that would happen is by sending out scouts who would come back and report. And here, these scouts, they're sent by the Lord to patrol the earth. They're going to go out and bring information back to the Lord. Now, that's symbolizing something. God doesn't really need to have a scout come back and report to him. He sees everything. And that's symbolizing that he is aware that his messengers can go anywhere and at any time, and they go everywhere and they see everything. Notice verse 11. So they answered the angel of the Lord who was standing among the myrtle trees and said, we have patrolled the earth, and behold, all the earth is peaceful and quiet. Now, at this point in history, there was not a lot of wars going on. Darius he was a new king, an emperor, and he was in control of his empire. Might have been some rebellions that he had to put down, but they took place very quickly and without too much fuss and bother. And so the earth, relatively speaking, it was peaceful, it was quiet. When you get to the book of Revelation, in John's day, in the first century, the earth was anything but peaceful and quiet. There was all sorts of wars going on. Jerusalem was being destroyed. There was bad things taking place. The Christians were being persecuted. And so the book of Revelation is not a peaceful and quiet book, but Zechariah is, at least, again, relatively speaking. And so the earth was peaceful and quiet. Notice that they are patrolling the earth. They can go, as we said, they can go wherever they want. They see everything, and they report back. And their report is that the earth is at peace. Now, we said chapter 1, we have the four horsemen, and the colors are red, sorrel, and white. When we get to Zechariah chapter 6, and we will eventually get there, we're going to see four chariots pulled by multicolored horses, and the horses will be red, white, black, dappled. You say, well, what's the significance of the different colors? I don't know of any significance of the different color. I'm not going to try to assign something special to it. When we get to Revelation chapter 6, there will be four horsemen, and the horses will be white, red, black, and the last one has been variously translated as either ashen or pale or even like a sickly green. But I think there's that sickly idea to it because in this case, there are things that are being represented, whether it is representing the white of a conqueror or for example, one is of death and disease and different things that are pictured here. So in chapter 1, they are sent out by God to patrol the earth. In chapter 6, they're going to be described as four spirits of heaven going out to patrol the earth. Just gives you a little bit more. You get the idea of angelic creatures. And then in Revelation chapter 6, they are called by the four living creatures around the throne, and they come forth in answer to various seals of a seal scroll that are being opened. And it's as if God's plan is being unfolded before our eyes. Chapter 1 and verse 12. Then the angel of the Lord answered and said, O Lord of hosts, how long will you have no compassion for Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, with which you have been indignant these 70 years? All the earth is peaceful and quiet now, but it certainly wasn't that way 70 years ago. Because remember, Jerusalem had been destroyed and the temple had been burned, which brings us up to date. That's why we're having this conversation, because we're going to be talking about this in the context of rebuilding the temple, which is, we know from history, is going to be rebuilt. Now, notice the reference to these 70 years. To what does that refer? It refers back to a prophecy that Jeremiah had given, and then Daniel had talked about that prophecy as well, a prophecy that had said that the Jewish people would be exiled from the land for a period of 70 years. Now, that exile, in a sense, had begun in the days of Daniel, when Daniel and some of the nobility had been exiled to Babylon. And there had actually been not one, not two, but three different deportations, successively getting worse. First Daniel, and then in the days of Ezekiel, he had been exiled with about 10,000 craftsmen. And the worst came in the year 586 BC, when the temple was destroyed and the rest of the general population was taken away into captivity, and thus began the 70 years. And so the 70 years really begins in 586 BC with the destruction of the temple. And notice we go 70 years and we're going to go get to 516 BC, which, as we're reading in Zechariah 1:12, that we're not there yet, not quite. We're close. The process is beginning again for the temple to be rebuilt, but it's not done yet. So, like the kids ask in the back of the car, we'll ask their parents, Mom, Dad, are we there yet? And the answer is no, we're not there yet. The temple is not quite rebuilt yet, but we're getting close. And the question is, Lord, how long will you have no compassion on Jerusalem and the cities of Judah? When when will the punishment end? Verse 14. So the angel who was speaking with me said to me, proclaim, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, I am exceedingly, now my translation says jealous, and that works. Although in Hebrew, the term there can either be used for jealousy, as we know it, or it can be used of zealousness. And the same word carries two different ideas, both a highly emotional state of affairs. And I think perhaps exceedingly zealous might actually work a little bit better here. I'm exceedingly zealous for Jerusalem and Zion, but I'm very angry with the nations who are at ease. Notice, um, God wants to bring, He wants to restore Jerusalem. He has punished them, but He has brought them back, and now they're rebuilding, and He wants to see the temple rebuilt so that He can come and be with His people. But notice the anger now is with the nations who were at ease. For while I was only a little angry, they furthered the disaster. God certainly brought Babylon against Judah and Jerusalem and against the temple. But those pagan nations did more than they were called to do. They they took the punishment of God and they carried it to the next level. And so that's what's being described here. Verse 16, therefore, thus says the Lord, I will return to Jerusalem with compassion. The question had been, are you going to show compassion? And now comes the answer. I'm going to do that. My house will be built in it. The process of rebuilding the temple has begun and it's going to continue, and the temple is going to be rebuilt, declares the Lord of hosts. And a measuring line will be stretched over Jerusalem. Now that's a good thing. Jerusalem's going to be measured out. Verse 17, again proclaim, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, my cities will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort and again choose Jerusalem. God says, I'm not done with Jerusalem. I'm going to do something special in Jerusalem. Notice that word comfort. I'm going to bring comfort to Jerusalem. Now, when we get to the New Testament, of course, we have the picture of Jesus coming, the Messiah, and he comes and he's presented before the people. He does his ministry. He is betrayed. He's arrested. He's crucified, dead, buried, and rises from the dead. But after that, remember in the New Testament, you have the coming of a comforter. That the Lord again will come to this place and he comforts his people beginning at Jerusalem. And it's no accident that both the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, but also the coming of the Holy Spirit and the birth of the church took place, as was promised, in this chosen place of Jerusalem.